Kabbalah! Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. How's everybody doing? We're working our way through the Moshav Band's Shabbat Volume 1 album. That's their version of Lecha Dodi. That's a song we sing on Friday nights as we welcome the Sabbath bride. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. All right, we have some very beautiful teachings to cover today. Some of the most universal in the Torah, in the Talmud, for us, for our community. Very beautiful stuff. Who is with us as we get together to do a little learning on a Tuesday night? James in Indianapolis, Melissa in Great Neck, New York, Tom in Pennsylvania. Shandora from the Bronx. I lived in the Bronx for a few years back in the 70s. Rebecca in LA, Yehudit in South Carolina, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, John in Maine, Nancy, North Carolina. Kopitzi says shalom, shalom to you. John in Massachusetts, John in Sedona. Paula in Chicago, Leona in Illinois, Gwen, I believe in Michigan, right? Bill in Columbia, Missouri, and I'll be reading your dedication momentarily. Stephen in New Hampshire, Tom in saying prayers for the people in Louisiana and Mississippi. I mean, we've just been seeing some terrifying images of that storm Ida. It's receded now, right? But there's still a lot that people have to deal with. I'm sure a lot of people are without power. I know it's incredibly destructive. May everyone's life return to normal soon. Paul in the Great Northwest, Renee in Indiana, Belle in Illinois, Nicholas in Portland, Christo in Lubbock, Pauline in Arkansas, Callie in Mobile, Alabama. A nice prayer from Bill. Lord God, you made the waters of the sea and appointed their borders. Stretch forth your hand to defend your children in the path of the storms. Amen. Bella in Florida. Deborah says shalom. Chaim in Charlotte. Gwen says I got it right. I'm glad. Zach in Washington. Sharon says her husband is a Bronx boy. Shirlyn is in central Luzon. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but in the Philippines. So welcome to you, Shirlyn, from across the globe. And Sarah Metz right here in LA. We are really spanning the world. Marjorie in Georgia, Seraphim in Pine Grove, California, Lynn in North Texas, Gigi in British Columbia. Welcome, everybody. Just want to mention immediately, today we're doing Daf, Nun Hey, page 55 here in Tractate Sukkah, the 7th volume of the Talmud. This tractate, the Laws of Sukkot, ends on page 56. That's tomorrow, so we'll be making a siyum, nice celebration for finishing a tractate. Bring something to make a l'chaim, your favorite beverage, maybe a little snack so we can make a blessing as well. Some kind of mizonos is what we usually do, a cookie, a cracker, something like that. So we'll be celebrating our completion of the 7th volume with God's help tomorrow. And then we'll just start the first few words of the next tractate, which is Beitzah, and that in the Koran Talmud is found in the same volume, the same book, as it were, as Rosh Hashanah. So between Sukkot and Rosh Hashanah, there's a different volume, which is Beitzah, and we'll be getting into that tomorrow. Okay. Bill is dedicating today's class, sponsoring our learning. Really beautiful dedication. So Bill, a very important part of our Accidental Talmudist community. He's been with us every day. He usually was with us from Berkeley, where he's a theological student, but lately has been with us from Missouri, going back to the family home, as it were. And Bill says, dedicated in honor of the Accidental Talmudist community, all of us in the community, and the glory of God. From July 2020 to July 2021, I had an annus horribilis. I guess that's Latin for a horrible year. My grandmother suffered a stroke and fell, then suffered another and passed away. May her memory always be for a blessing. I had to scramble to see to her estate while trying to finish my classes. I was a victim of a housing scam. I had to travel across the country to return to a home that was no longer livable. I went through some very dark times, but through it all, AT Daily, our class here, was a source of constancy and spiritual succor. When Sukkot, right? How do you pronounce that word properly? It's a word I've read many times and never said out loud. But comfort. And when I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel in early July, and especially as I secured my AmeriCorps position, wow, Bill, Yasher Koach, may you be strengthened in doing this beautiful work. AmeriCorps is right. You're becoming a teacher in a community that really needs teachers. Beautiful work. And a place in a new community, I promised God that I would donate this sum to Accidental Talmudist as a thank offering for all God, has done for me, including leading me to this wonderful community. Bless you all, Bill Eldridge. Wow, what a beautiful dedication. Bill, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. May you be strengthened in your important work. May you never stop learning and never stop sharing what you learn. You're really a treasure in our community, and we thank you, and let us say amen. Anybody who's interested in sponsoring a class, enabling us to share more Torah with more people, you can do that through our website, accidentaltalmudist.org. Okay, now it's amazing how everything comes together. In today's daf, we're going to be talking about a teaching I've mentioned before, but this idea that during Sukkot, during the festival of Sukkot, there are many offerings that were brought when the Holy Temple was standing, including 14 bulls on the first day, 13 on the second. Is that right? No, 13 bulls on the first day, 12 on the second, 11 on the third, etc., to the seventh day. And if you add them all up, it's 70 bulls. And our sages learn out from that, and we'll hear it on today's daf, that these 70 bulls represented the 70 nations of the world. Sukkot is the most universal of holidays, and the idea is that during Sukkot, we pray for rain, that it will come at the right time and in the right amount, so that, the land will be watered, the food will grow, and we'll all have what to eat and not starve. And so when we're praying for rain, to water the fields around the world, that's not just for the Jews, of course, it's for all people. So it's a very universal holiday. We'll be reading about that today. As Bill has told us many times, he's not Jewish, but he takes Jewish scripture very seriously. He is really a learned guy in the Bible. A few days ago, I think, Bill, you asked a question, something like, are non-Jews encouraged to visit the Holy Temple? So this question sort of could have three dimensions. Were non-Jews encouraged to visit the temple when it was standing? Are non-Jews encouraged to visit the Western Wall, which is the remnant of the temple that exists now? And will non-Jews be encouraged to visit the Holy Temple when it is restored in the world to come, after Mashiach, after the Messiah comes and the third temple is reestablished in Jerusalem? So I said basically yes. Basically yes. Non-Jews are definitely encouraged to go. They definitely should feel like they have a stake in the temple, as it were, even though, the original temple, Solomon's temple, the second temple, and the third temple, in a sense, is the temple of the Jews. We're following the commands to the Jewish people in bringing our offerings in that temple. But as it says in Isaiah 56, my house shall be called a house for all peoples. And I received a direct message from another member of our community, Sharon Savage, who I'm pretty sure is not Jewish, and who said that she visited the Jerusalem and went to the wall and was deeply moved while she was there. and then wanted to learn more about Judaism, not to become a Jew, but because, these are universal teachings, holy teachings. Even if you're a Christian, 3/4 of the Christian Bible is the Hebrew Bible. And she just wanted to learn more from the original sources. So when she heard about this little interchange with Bill, she said, and point out to Bill, probably Bill is already familiar with it, but I'll share it with our community, what Solomon said when he dedicated the first temple. So she directed my attention to First Book of Kings, chapter 8, verses 41 through 43. And at the time that Solomon built the temple on the spot that his father, King David, chose, and then, it was finished and it was dedicated, and Solomon prayed to God that God would heed the prayers and the offerings that were brought with sincerity at the temple. He also said that if people lie and cheat and come here and take vows that they don't follow, etc., that they should be held accountable. But people who bring offerings with sincere devotion to God and pray to God for their true needs in life, that God should heed those prayers. And King Solomon did not limit his prayer that God should heed the prayers offered in the temple only to the Jewish people. Said King Solomon, should the foreigner too, not of your people Israel, come from a distant land for the sake of your name, having heard of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm, should he come and pray at this house, the holy temple, which Solomon had just completed building, please God, listen from your heavenly abode and fulfill all that the foreigner calls out to you, for then all the peoples of the land will know your name and revere you as your people Israel does, for then they will know that it is your name that is proclaimed over this house. Beautiful, a beautiful, beautiful verse to have in mind. And the point is that everyone should feel, not just the children of Israel, the descendants of Israel, should feel that they have a stake. Obviously, anyone who converts to Judaism, there's no difference between them and Jews who were born Jewish, right? If you convert to Judaism, you're just a Jew, like everyone else. There is no distinction. But even if you're not a Jew and you don't become a Jew, you have a place in the Holy Temple. The bulls that are brought on Sukkot are an offering for the whole world, as we'll be learning today. And it's just interesting to me that Bill offered this beautiful dedication, that Sharon sent me that message in response to a comment that was from a few days ago in our class, and it's all coming together as it were right now. And I'll just offer that in this week's Torah portion, a very short portion, but a very, very beautiful one, right? So Nitzavim, where Moses says at the beginning of the Torah portion, and not with you alone am I forming this covenant and swearing this oath, but with those who are standing here with us today before the eternal our God. This is Moses giving his final sermon to the Jewish people, the children of Israel, before they enter the land of Israel. But says Moses, not with you alone am I forming this covenant and swearing this oath, but with those who are standing here with us today before the eternal our God, and with those who are not here with us today, 3,000 years ago, meaning who is that who is not standing with them today, 3,000 years ago? Us, who are standing here in Moses' future and our present. But the Torah was for all time, of course. Okay, let's get into this. All right, we're picking it up at the bottom of, at the top of 55, page 55 on the A side. Okay, so we've been discussing, we're in chapter 5. Tomorrow is the last page, right? Tomorrow we're having the siyum. If you joined us late, join us definitely tomorrow as we complete Tractate Sukkah and make a little celebration. Okay, so we're on page 55, and we've been studying the third Mishna of chapter 5, and that was talking about how many trumpet blasts could be heard each day in the temple during an ordinary weekday, during Shabbos, during the new moon festival, Rosh Chodesh, when there was a new moon, when there was a new month, and also during festivals like Passover, Shavuos, and Sukkot, which we're studying here. So apropos these teachings about how many trumpet blasts were given, because trumpet blasts always accompanied the offerings. Also, when there were additional offerings, the question came up, well, what about when Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos? How many trumpet blasts were there? So on this question, so the Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Rabbi Acha, as Rava Bar Shmuel taught this baraisa. I might have thought that just as when Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, the new moon of the beginning of a new month in the Hebrew calendar, that just as we sound the trumpets, I might have thought that just as when Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh do not coincide, they sound the trumpets for the additional offerings of Shabbos in and of itself, and on Rosh Chodesh, the additional offerings are accompanied by trumpet blasts for those offerings, right? So if Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh don't coincide, then obviously the additional offerings of those days each get their own trumpet blast. What happens when Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh do coincide? So you would think that, well, the additional offering of Shabbos is going to get its trumpet blast, and the additional offering of Rosh Chodesh will get its trumpet blast. And as we talked about yesterday, and so you would think that the trumpet blast of Rosh Chodesh will go first, even though normally things which are more frequent would go first. But in this case, announcing that a new month has begun was very important in ancient Israel, because when the Sanhedrin said it's the new month, that's when the new month began. It wasn't a fixed calendar. Now we have a fixed calendar. So you would think that there would be two sets of trumpet blasts for the two additional offerings when Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh coincide, and when it coincided when the temple was standing. That's what you would think. Therefore, the verse states, Numbers 10:10, and on the day of your rejoicing, and at your appointed times, and on your new moons, plural, and you shall sound the trumpets for your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, and they will be a memorial for you before your God. I am the Lord your God. Indicating that one blast is sounded for all. And the Gemara suggests, okay, so this is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rabbi Acha, who said, right, that the trumpet blast for Rosh Chodesh would precede the trumpet blast of Shabbos when they coincide. But in fact, we don't do both trumpet blasts. There's only going to be one trumpet blast. And so the Gemara concludes, indeed, it is a conclusive refutation. Now, since this baraisa was cited, the Gemara asks, what is the derivation cited in this baraisa? How does the phrase, and on your new moons, prove that the trumpets are sounded once for all the additional offerings, even when Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh each have their own additional offerings when those coincide on the same day? Why is there only one trumpet blast for all the additional offerings and not separate trumpet blasts for the additional offerings? Where am I? How does it prove that? And Abaye said, the verse states, and on your new moons, in plural, indicating that all the months are equated to each other. And just as on a typical new moon, the trumpets are sounded once for the additional offering, so too, when Shabbos and the new moon coincide, the trumpets are sounded once and no more. And Rav Ashi said, in this verse it is written, your moon, Hod Shechem, without a yud, in the singular, and in the same verse it is written, and on your new, Uvarashe, in the plural. And which is the month that has two new beginnings? You must say that is Tishrei, which is coming up next week, right? Because that's the month that has two beginnings at its beginning. The beginning of the month, Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, and the beginning of the year, also known as Rosh Hashanah. What just happened? I hope that comes back. Oh my God. For some reason, Facebook is telling me that the broadcast ended. but I'm still broadcasting, so I hope that that is not what actually happened. Let me just double check. I hate when there's silly glitches like this. Please, I hope we're still broadcasting. Yeah, we're still broadcasting. Okay, sorry about that. Where am I? Okay, and so that is Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh, which happen on the same day. You must say that it is Rosh Hashanah, which is the beginning of both the new year and the new month. And yet, the Merciful One says, your moon in the singular, indicating that it is one and the trumpets are sounded only once. And furthermore, contrary to the statement of Rabbi Acha, it was taught in a Baraisa on the intermediate days of the festival. On the first day, what would they say as the song accompanying the offering on that day? And now we're getting a little list of the psalms which the Levites would sing in the Holy Temple during the days of Sukkot, during the festival days of Sukkot. And they're going to name what psalms would be sung on the intermediate days, meaning after the first full festival day, which psalms are being sung in the temple. And I'll just read the law on this because it was pretty interesting. So on each day of Sukkot, a unique song accompanied the additional offering. During the intermediate days of the festival, they would recite the psalms designated in the Baraisa in the sequence prescribed by Rav Safra. On the first of the intermediate days, they would say, ascribe unto the Lord, O you sons of the might. On the second day, but unto the wicked, actually, I'll do it from over here. On the intermediate days, what would they say? On the first of the intermediate days, they would say, ascribe unto the Lord, O you sons of might. That's from Psalm 29. On the second day, what would they say? The psalm that contains the verse, but unto the wicked, God says, what have you to do to declare my statutes? That's Psalm 50. On the third day, what would they say? The psalm containing the verse, Psalm 94, who will rise up for me against the evildoers? On the fourth day, also from Psalm 94, consider you brutish among the people. On the fifth day, what would they say? From Psalm 81, I removed his shoulder from the burden. And on the sixth day, what would they say? All the foundations of the earth are moved. Psalm 82. The choice of these particular psalms, says Rav Steinsaltz, for the intermediate days has been explained in several ways. The Meiri explains that the first day's psalm was chosen because it contains the verse, the voice of the Lord is upon the waters. That's Psalm 29. We talked about it actually yesterday because the Moshav band was singing it during the warm-up, and we sing it on Shabbos. Very powerful song, Psalm 29, Mizmor LeDavid. Talking about like God's voice is on the waters and blasting into the world. And, you know, if you would listen with a spiritual ear, you could always hear God's voice. And this alludes to the water libation of Sukkot. The Lord's voice is on the waters. The second day psalm contains the verse, and pay your vows unto the Most High. And Sukkot is a period when many vow and gift offerings are brought to be sacrificed, because the people who are planning to bring a vow or gift offering can't just do that any time, but when they went up for the pilgrimage festival of Sukkot, they would bring those offerings with them and offer them. On the third and fourth days, they sang Psalm 94, which mentions divine vengeance against the wickedness of the nations, because in the Second Temple era, they were subjugated to the nations, namely Rome. And Sukkot is a period when the nations are judged. As we see, we bring offerings on behalf of the nations, but it's also a time when, like Israel, the nations are judged, right? So this time that is coming up, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot, it's a time of judgment. What will be our destiny for the coming year? And here we're learning, not for just the Jews, but for everybody. On the fifth day, they sang Psalm 81, both for its mention of the redemption of Joseph from prison and for its words of blessing for an abundant yield of produce, which is dependent on the supply of water for which the world is judged on Sukkot. And he fed him from the fat of wheat. On the sixth day, they sang Psalm 82 because it contains the verse, God stands in the congregation of God, alluding to God as judge. as it is the final day of Sukkot, during which the world is judged with regard to the water supply for the coming year. The 6th day, meaning the 6th of the intermediate days, after the first full festival day. And that actually concludes our discussion. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Now we proceed to Mishnah number 4. We're at the top of the B side of page 55. And here is where the Mishnah mentions the 70 bulls offered during Sukkot on behalf of the nations. On the first festival day of Sukkot, there were 13 bulls, 2 rams, and 1 goat there. And the Mishnah proceeds to discuss the division of labor for the festival offerings among the 24 priestly watches, all of which serve in the temple on the pilgrimage festivals. There are 24 watches, meaning the Kohanim, the descendants of Moses' brother Aaron. These are the priests, right? A priest in Judaism is not a job that you can get by working hard. Right? You can become a rabbi, you can become a sage, by working hard and learning a lot. But a priest is a hereditary position that you can only be a Cohen if your father was a Cohen, and your ancestry goes all the way back to Aaron, Moses' brother. Okay, so by the time the temples were built, there were many Kohanim. There were many descendants of Aaron, which ones merited to serve in the temple. They had more than they needed. What did they do? They divided all of them into priestly watches. So there were 24 groups divided by families, and each family had a certain number of priests, and they would serve for 1 week at a time, and the outgoing shift would be replaced by the new shift on Shabbos, and then they would serve for a week. So you would do that twice a year to have your full week as the priestly watch serving in the temple. But then during the festivals, when there were so many pilgrims coming to Jerusalem and so many offerings to be brought, they needed, holiday staff, right? Like extra staff. So they brought in all the priests of all the watches to serve in the temple. Okay, so now that all the priests are there, how are they going to divide the labor of bringing the Sukkot offerings? Bringing a bull, as we've discussed before, required many priests, right? They would slaughter it, they would cut it up. Then a bull, it's very heavy. They would cut it up into many pieces, and it took many priests. I think, what do we say, like 9, 10, 11 priests to bring all the parts up the ramp to the altar so that it could be offered upon the altar. So the 16 offerings mentioned above on the first day of Sukkot, 13 bulls, 2 rams, and 1 goat. So 16 animals. The 16 offerings mentioned above were divided among 16 of those families, those priestly families, the priestly watches, 1 offering per watch. 14 sheep remained to be divided among the 8 remaining watches. On the first day of the festival, 6 of the 8 remaining watches sacrificed 2 sheep each for a total of 12, and the remaining 2 watches sacrificed 1 sheep each. On the second day of the festival, the first of the intermediate days, when 12 bulls were sacrificed, 15 of the priestly watches sacrificed the bulls, the ram, and the goat. 5 of the remaining watches sacrificed 2 sheep each, and the remaining 4 watches sacrificed 1 sheep each. I'm not going to read like the division of labor for every day, but basically they divide out all the offerings brought that day among the 24 priestly watches that are serving in the temple in a way that is pretty much fair. And then when you get to the 8th day, now it's Shmini Atzeret. It's not Sukkot. It's its own festival. And so they go back to a totally different system of having a lottery that day. There's a lot of priestly watches there, and they do a lottery to see who gets what. That's the Mishnah. The Gemara. I skip a little bit. I'm getting closer to the end of 55, to the end of the Gemara on Mishnah number 4. We're also going to have Mishnah number 5 in a moment. So about the 70 bulls. Rabbi Elazar said, right, if you add them up, 13 bulls on the first day, 7 bulls on the last day, descending order, if you add up all those bulls, it's 70. These 70 bulls that are sacrificed as additional offerings over the course of the 7 days of Sukkot, to what do they correspond? They correspond to the 70 nations of the world. And when we say the 70 nations of the world, That means all the nations of the world. There used to be 70, but even when there were 70, there's sometimes more than 70, sometimes less. Borders are always changing. But the number 70, when used with respect to nations, implies all the nations of the world. So they correspond to the 70 nations of the world, and they are brought to atone for their sins and to hasten world peace. Why is a single bull sacrificed on the 8th day of assembly, Shmini Atzeret? It corresponds to the singular nation, Israel. And the Gemara cites a parable, we've seen this before, about a king of flesh and blood who said to his servants, "Prepare me a great feast that will last for several days." When the feast concluded on the last day, he said to his beloved servants, "Prepare for me a small feast so that I can derive pleasure from you alone." The VIP after party. That's what Shmini Atzeret is. And Rabbi Yochanan said, "Woe unto the nations of the world that lost something and they don't even know what they lost. When the temple is standing, the 70 bulls sacrificed on the altar during the festival of Sukkot atones for them. And now that the temple is destroyed, who atones for them?" And so we see how universal this holiday is, and that really it takes into account all the nations of the world. I also like how this is phrased in the present tense. Not, woe unto the nations that lost something they didn't even know what they lost when the temple was standing. The 70 bulls atoned for them. It doesn't say that. It says when the temple is standing. It is temporarily destroyed. Temporarily, it's been 2,000 years, but it's coming back when the Messiah comes and the third temple is established. That concludes the Gemara on Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 5. I'm almost done, so please get your questions and comments in. I'm coming to that. We're just going to read the Mishnah of Mishnah number 5, and then its discussion, its Gemara, will be tomorrow when we do page 56. The final page of this tractate, and we'll have a little celebration, a siyum, to celebrate completing the 7th tractate of the Talmud. Mishnah 5. At 3 times during the year, all 24 priestly watches have equal status in that all receive a share in the temple service independent of the standard order of the watches, and all receive a share in the accompanying gifts of the priesthood, in the portions of the offerings of the festivals sacrificed on the altar, and in the distribution of the showbread on Shabbos during the festivals. Meaning, during the rest of the year, one priestly watch is serving in the temple at any one time. They receive a distribution of certain gifts that are given to the priests, the showbreads that rest on the special table in the temple for the week, and then on Shabbos, the new showbreads are brought and the old ones are distributed to the priests. Certain offerings that are brought on the altar, some like elevation offerings, are consumed entirely on the altar. Other offerings like sin offerings, a certain piece of those offerings goes to the priests and they eat it, right? The Torah dictates that they eat a piece of those offerings. And the hides of certain other kinds of offerings go to the priests. Remember, the priests, like the Levites, did not receive land in Israel. All the other tribes were given, every family was given land. The Levites did not. So they receive a tithe and they live in the cities and they serve in the temple, and the priests so much more. On Shavuos, that coincides with Shabbos, when the 2 loaves offered on Shavuos would be distributed together with the distribution of the showbreads, the priest charged with the distribution says to each fellow priest, "Here is matzah from the showbread for you." The showbreads were unleavened breads, soft unleavened breads, not like the stiff unleavened bread we eat today. "And here is leavened bread from the 2 loaves for you," right? On Shavuos, we bring these 2 loaves of leavened bread. Shavuos is a summer holiday, and that's when the early wheat has come in, right? And that's when we can start eating wheat from that year. And so the principle is that the priestly watch, whose time is fixed during the festival sacrifices, during the festival, sacrifices the daily offerings during the festival, as well as vow offerings, free will offerings, and all other communal offerings. And that watch sacrifices all of them even during the festival, when other aspects of the service are shared by all the watches. In other words, all of the priestly watches serve during the festival, but one of the priestly watches, it would have been their week anyway. So for that priestly watch, they're the ones that are going to be responsible for doing a lot of the voluntary offerings and receiving some of that. And they're still going to, it's going to be noted among all the priests that one of those priestly watches, that would have been its week. Everyone is there to handle the huge overflow of festival offerings, peace offerings, etc., that are coming from all the people. But it is acknowledged that one of those priestly watches would have been there anyway. And the law about this: offerings sacrificed during the festival that are unrelated to the festival. For example, the daily offerings and the personal offerings, such as vows, are sacrificed by the watch scheduled to perform the temple service that week. And that watch receives the portions and the hides of those animals. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let us go to your comments and questions. Okay, Bill is telling me how to pronounce the word succor, right? When you offer comfort to somebody, S-U-C-C-O-R. I think the British spell that S-U-C-C-O-U-R. And I said that I've read that word many times but never said it aloud. So how do you actually say it? Bill is telling me succor. You say it succor, succor. When you spell it out for pronunciation, it looks pretty funny. Okay. Christo Cheney, here's a question. Could someone who had a conversation that met the halachic standards conversion, not a conversation. Could someone who had a conversion that met the halachic standards be accepted in the rebuilt temple as a Jew if the conversion isn't accepted by Orthodox Judaism? Someone I know converted to Judaism and meets the halachic requirements, but the Orthodox doesn't accept his conversion as valid, so I'm wondering if my friend would be accepted there as Jewish. The simple answer to your question from me, Christo, is that question is above my pay grade. I cannot answer that question. What you're referring to is that there are reform and conversions done by reform and conservative rabbis, that denomination of Judaism, which are not accepted by the Rabbinut in Israel and the Orthodox community as valid conversions. Basically because the person, who is becoming Jewish is pledging to keep mitzvahs, right? And, in conservative and especially in reform, it's like they've adopted this philosophy where Jews don't have to keep mitzvahs, are not obligated in the commandments. So it's a problem for the conversion of a person who's becoming a Jew, but then is, right away not keeping mitzvahs. That's the issue. How you resolve that? This is a very controversial issue. Like I said, it's above my pay grade to answer those questions. You could do more research on that question. When people ask me about converting, I always advise do an Orthodox conversion so that you want to become Jewish. It's meaningful to you. So then have a conversion that's going to be universally accepted in the Jewish world. That's just my personal opinion. There's a lot more to this question, obviously. Sharon, Psalm 29's use of the word kol, voice, 7 times. It is also thought to equate to the 7 times when in creation, God used his kol, his voice, to create the world in Genesis. Oh, I never heard that connection. I love it. I love it. That's the Carlebach melody for Psalm 29. We belt that out on Friday nights. And you're really aware of the voice of the Lord is on the waters. The voice of the Lord is, going forth. Beautiful to connect that to the fact that God created the world with utterances. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God spoke. He did it with his utterances. Beautiful. Steve, all these bulls and rams, are they offerings to be burnt, or do they get to eat them after the sacrifice? I think I'm pretty sure when we're talking about the additional offerings, the Musaf offerings, these 70 bulls, I think they're elevation offerings, that they're burnt in their entirety. I could be wrong. I'm not sure. My impression is, somebody let me know. Sharon, do the 70 nations correlate with the 70 faces of God? I am not sure about that. They certainly correlate with the 70 languages, right? And so we learned that Mordechai in the book of Esther, who had been a member of the Sanhedrin before the first temple was destroyed and they were exiled to Babylonia, the members of the Sanhedrin had to be incredibly well educated. They were all sages. Part of their sage training was to speak all the languages of the world. And that's why Mordecai understood what those two conspirators were saying when they were planning to kill the king Achashverosh, and he was able to foil their plot, reveal it to them, and that set up the moment later when the king wished to reward Mordecai for the service he performed for the king, and it ended up, that the evil Haman was sort of giving advice on how somebody who the king wishes to honor should be honored, thinking it would be himself, and it went to Mordecai instead, and Haman had to lead him around by a horse on the king's horse all around the city. But it was because he spoke the 70 languages. Why 70 languages? Corresponding to the 70 nations. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for a big siyum on Tractate Sukkah. Bring your favorite beverage. Bring a little snack, something that is a grain product, not bread because then you have to wash, but that's why we like to have a cookie, cake, cracker, something like that. And then we can make a mizonos blessing. And we will celebrate completing this tractate on page 56 and then move on to Tractate Beitzah. All the best. Have a terrific night.